Every who down in Who Newville liked the holidays a ton, but where to get great prices on gifts, they had no idea. None. They searched and they searched for great gifts under $25. Gifts for spouses and friends and even their toddlers. When suddenly one who shouted, Walmart has what you want, knowing they have Lego, Tree Hut, and low prices to flaunt. So they enjoy the holiday season as Who's often do. Cheering and shouting, Walmart has incredible gifts. Who knew? Find gifts they'll love under $25 at Walmart.
Hi, this is Joe from Vanta. In today's digital world, compliance regulations are changing constantly, and earning customer trust has never mattered more. Vanta helps companies get compliant fast and stay secure with the most advanced AI, automation, and continuous monitoring out there. So whether you're a startup going for your first SOC 2 or ISO 27001, or a growing enterprise managing vendor risk, Vanta makes it quick, easy, and scalable. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. Get started at vanta.com.
Hello, my name's David Runciman, and this is Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast. Today, I'm speaking to the novelist Ian McEwan, who was our first ever guest on PPF. This time, we're talking about the ideas in his remarkable new novel, What We Can Know, which, as you'll hear in this conversation, is really a meditation on the relationship between past, present, and future. In particular, what it would be to imagine our present as a future past. That is, how will future generations think about us, particularly if they have suffered some of the calamities that we may be brewing? Ian, maybe we could start with me asking you just to say something about a phrase that appears in your novel, and I've heard you talk about it elsewhere. The idea that there is a great deal of ruin in a planet, which is riffing on Adam Smith's phrase, there's a great deal of ruin in a nation. Just tell me a bit about what you mean by that. What is the ruin in the planet? How much of us can be absorbed, do you think?
Well, if you regard us as part of nature and then look at the various experiments that are going on around the world, seabed off northwest Scotland, a big chunk of the Pacific and so on, everyone is astonished, people who are in the field, by the resilience and actually the dynamism of the natural world in which it pushes back and flourishes the moment we stop doing bad things to it, at a speed that is really surprising and gratifying. And also that species thought extinct suddenly pop up again. And I think there's an analogy, if not a direct connection with that and human culture. So it's not only that what we're laying waste to currently in the Congo and Amazon and so on would push back if we disrupted all our supply lines and industrial civilization collapsed through climate change or war. But there's also a fantastic resilience in human nature and inventiveness. So I think it would take a lot. Look at Ukraine. I think given the chance, it will push back. It will surprise everyone. Look at Europe post-1945, Berlin, Dresden, Hamburg. So it does take a lot. Obviously, a full-out nuclear war would extinguish a lot of possibilities. I mean, there the ruin would be instant and would take a long time to recover for obvious reasons. But I don't think we should therefore stop doing what we're doing and laying waste to the planet. But we must beware of not paralyzing ourselves with pessimism about this. And it will take more than just a few years of us to completely ruin the soils, completely hack down the rainforests and so on. So it's part of my general sense that barring an all-out nuclear war, we're likely to sort of scrape through just. If you draw a line for the first quarter of this century and look at the rest of the 3 quarters, I think we'll limp from crisis to crisis, catastrophe to catastrophe, hurricanes no one's seen the like of, etc. But there's a lot of us, and I think there's a lot of resilience, both in nature and human culture.
It's also true, and you just hinted at it, that our current apocalyptic imaginations, they tend to be all or nothing in the sense that we're waiting to discover what is the thing that's going to get us, essentially. There's a field called existential risk, a flourishing academic field, subset of social science, which is about what is the thing that's going to get us. And you're almost asked in that field to pick your poison. Is it AI? Is it climate change? Is it nuclear war? Is it biology, terror or error in the language? Is it something that's going to come out of a lab? And it's like we're waiting to know the answer to a question. And the question is, which of the things is our nemesis? You suggest in this imagined future, and this is one of the things I love about the book, that nothing is all or nothing, in the sense that any of these things is more than one thing. So we tend to think one of these things is going to be the thing, but actually it's more like, as you describe it, any of these things has multiple effects, some good, some bad. Limited nuclear war could make the climate temporarily more livable. There are all sorts of things that might happen. And actually, we think of the future as something where all of our disparate problems are going to be aggregated into something. And you imagine a future in which the catastrophe is a kind of disaggregating force. It breaks apart the things that at the moment in our imaginations we can't get beyond because we think there has to be a single answer to the question.
Well, let's add to your catastrophe list your own recent contribution in population decline, even to the point of extinction. That's one more thing to worry about, which seems like, as you suggest, there's very little we can do. Handing out medals to mothers just doesn't hack it.
Although it has to be said that one is slower. So the other four are the kind of ones where there will be a moment. It's almost religious. There will be a moment of revelation, whereas the slow burn population one is more like something that will just play out over the long run.
Well, it's already happening, as you say. Japan, Canada, and so on, hitting 0.75 is pretty alarming if you live there and if you've got a fair amount of xenophobia stitched into your culture and you don't want any immigrants, then you're for it, mate. This is all part of my scraping through. They might all come at once, but at the same time, if our supply lines, supply chains are disrupted massively and industrial civilization slows, we will at the same time lessen the poisons we are putting into the atmosphere. So there will be a bit of a pushback, maybe not in the areas that trouble us much or interest us much, like marine life or coral polyps and so on. But there will be maybe well-hidden advantages to our being less energetic in our ways. The one thing that concerns me is the cumulative effect of all those anxieties, and you can take your pick, and you can specialize in one of them, or even make an academic career in one of them, brings with it a kind of metaphysical gloom. You hear, ordinary people say, my grandchildren won't have as nice a life as I did or my parents did. And that in itself is another worry, a kind of meta worry for all the rest, because once you start to abandon any faith in the future as a society, you then lose touch with the idea of progress. And I know that progress has been hugely challenged as an idea, but I belong to a rather old-fashioned view that to abandon hope in the idea of progress is the ultimate kind of dereliction of duty to others. So this pessimism could be fatal to us, and we could just begin, and I worry sometimes that this is happening already, that we begin just to party, basically, that we just kind of give up on the whole matter. So I saw a report in the FT that big corporations no longer wish to be seen to be giving large sums of money to all kinds of philanthropic projects. Lots of countries are rearming, preparing for war because they want peace in the ridiculous formulation of Renatus. If you want peace, prepare for peace, I would say. So and maybe it's an age-related matter, as I head into my 80th birthday in a couple of years' time, tend to grasp at the hopeful signs. And I noticed that one of the prophets of doom, Bill McEwan, has just written a very optimistic book saying actually that the rate of installation of solar and wind around the world is now at an unstoppable point, increasing exponentially. We crossed a very important line in 2022 when solar panels, for example, became a lot cheaper than any fossil fuel source for creating electricity. And even in Trump's America, companies are still installing it if they're in the southern states because it's cheaper. So, as I suggested in my novel Solar, it's not idealism that will save us, it'll be self-interest. Only a few years ago, 1 gigawatt of solar energy was going in once a week. Recently, that's down to about 18 hours. It's predicted to be at about 12 hours at the beginning of next year. We don't notice it because it's being driven by the Chinese. Massive export to all of Africa, India, Pakistan. Farmers are installing it because it's sort of cheap, available, off-grid, which is unreliable in those countries or non-existent. So it's an unstoppable process, according to McEwan, because it's cheap. And we expect any day, it might already have happened, Chinese emissions, that inflection curve will head downwards. I hope he's right. So we might be just at that turning point. In the next year or two, we might be at that point. So I hang on to that one in that little corner of our disasters. And success will actually encourage everyone else to be more successful. And again, it will be part of my prediction of we'll scrape through. It's not going to be easy. We'll probably hit 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees by the end of the century. Bad enough, catastrophic enough, especially in the poorer countries. But the poorer countries generally tend to be the hottest countries, absolutely swimming in photons. If I was of religious disposition, I would say that it's amazing. We've got a nuclear power station 93 million miles away, completely harmless, showering us with photons. One of the laws of physics is a photon could be converted with just a sheet of glass and a bit of extra stuff into an electron. How beneficent. Any visitor to this planet would be amazed to think we had an energy crisis driven by fossil fuels when we're just being rained on by photons. And one of the points of interest of one bit of the Earth being hotter than another is that the wind blows downhill, as it were. And again, spin a bit of wire in a magnetic field, you generate electrons. Who would have guessed it? I mean, at the end of the 17th century, no one would have thought it could be so beneficent. It's very like, the best of all possible worlds. It's right there. It's very Voltairean.
Is the thing that's gripping us pessimism or is it fatalism? Because the optimism you just described is still the optimism of tipping points, of inexorable processes, of something happening which most of us would think we have no knowledge of in most cases, but also no particular say in. These are forces beyond our control. And even in the non-pessimistic scenarios, it still feels like we're waiting for the answer to a question which will reveal itself in a way that comes to us as an answer from the outside. It turned out that solar was the solution. It was there all along. We just weren't aware of it. Even the population story that you just alluded to, the fact that we have stopped having children, that is clearly a matter of human agency. And yet when you see it laid out, it looks like an inexorable force of nature beyond our power to control. So sometimes it feels to me like we are living in an age, and I'm going to ask you in a minute about how, this is the other theme of your book, how future generations will see our era. But we're living in an age not of pessimism, but of fatalism. We think we are the generation that has to wait for the answers to the big questions. And that is as big a barrier to faith in progress as pessimism is, because it does strip us of our agency.
Well, we think we're very important because we're the ones who happen to be alive with our self-evident possessions and relationships. And we lose sight of the fact we're going to die anyway. It is always amazing, we all carry on as if we're not. Except for every now and then, Larkin-like, we wake in the early morning, as in his poem A Bard, and reflect as his person does in the poem. Most things may not happen. This one will. Somehow we manage to push around our daily lives. Everyone who's dead behind us is a kind of ghost, and everyone who's yet to be born is a ghost, and we're wedged like the meat in a sandwich. But we will be the ghosts. There's a great temptation to pessimism, especially, I think, as you get past your 50s. And Frank Commode wrote very well about this, the great literary critic, that as we get older and perhaps do begin to wake up to the real idea of our mortality, it is unbearable, the idea that just as we were born in the middle of things, we are going to die in the middle of things. There's a great temptation of sort of a narrative forcing that we, our own fates, are connected to the fate of everything and everyone around us. We will die in the middle of things. We will die when we're just scraping through. So there's an enormous lack of clarity about where we're going, and it's impossible to predict. My daughter-in-law works for the British Antarctic Survey, studying mathematically the movement of glaciers over the rocks and stones below them. The mathematics are hugely complicated, but there are only about 3 variables. The number of variables involved in trying to predict oceans, atmosphere, winds, temperatures, and so much else, plus industrial civilization, it's so complex that almost impossible to guess the direction of flow. As for the pessimism, fatalism, both have to be avoided somehow. We need to talk ourselves into the idea of finding solutions. And one of the reasons I think we are more fatalistic than we need be is that my sense of things is all across the face of the planet are tens of thousands, if not millions, points of light of small groups who are trying to do things. On the banks of the poisoned river, someone has got a couple of 100 hectares and is rewilding. Same in northwest Scotland, same in all kinds of places in the world. If those points of light could be connected more in our minds, let alone anywhere else, I think we could detach ourselves from that fatalism, because the fatalism will just ensure that what we fear will happen. That's my notion of metaphysical glue. We will bake ourselves, we will be turkeys for the oven that we'll switch on.
And yet there's also a thought, and your novel picks up on this, that future generations will see us as the before time, in the sense something's coming, we don't know what it is, and the thing that comes is not likely to be the answer to the question, because the answer to the question is too complicated, as you say. It's that there is no simple answer to the question, what is coming for us? But nonetheless, if you think about the next 75 years of this century, it seems at least probable that the first quarter will look like a period that pre-existed something that marks a breakpoint. You suggest this in the book. We're more like the Edwardians in some ways. Or at the moment, there's real nostalgia for the 1970s and the 1990s. Those are the 2 decades that people seem to long for, particularly the people who didn't live through them, because they're the before time. The nostalgia for the 90s is people like watching Friends because they don't have smartphones. It's that. The nostalgia for the 70s is before even any of that stuff started. I was a child, you will remember the 70s better than me, but for the people who didn't live through it seems like a real time before all of the fakery started. Do you think we are, in that sense, despite everything that you say about the 1,000 points of light, we will be seen as the before time, the thing that's coming, whatever it is, and something's going to happen? There will be, at some point in this century, a nuclear exchange. There will be a natural disaster. There will be a technology failure and the planes will fall out of the sky. Something will happen which will make us look like the Edwardian summer.
Well, if you didn't live in northwest Europe but lived instead in sub-Saharan Africa, you would say it's already happening. And if you lived in Ukraine, especially the further east you go in Ukraine, you would say it's already happened. It's in the luxurious northwest corner of still liberal Europe that we think we're in an Edwardian summer, and it's a very attractive notion. Well, as well as being a horrible notion too. So that terrible thing might already have happened. But again, there's some research to suggest, coming back to the climate, that they're wrong, those who say whatever happens, whatever inflection we finally have on our carbon emissions, that the damage will take hundreds of years to repair, as it were, as the system repairs itself. And that, in fact, we might see a recovery much quicker than people expect. I might be clutching at straws. I think the pandemic gave us a taste of what it's like to suffer a global crisis. that we were all in this together up to a point at which, of course, vaccines were available. And it was a rehearsal, just to take up your point about something's coming down the track towards us, rehearsal for what it's like to feel that all 8 or 9 billion of us are in the same boat. That it seemed in its earliest days, at least, something that could really alter the course of history. Then it turned out it was not quite as bad as we thought, but it was a taste. And I thought when it was over that would vastly accelerate general concern about the climate. In fact, it did nothing of the sort. It fell into a kind of amnesia. Similarly, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was another moment of sort of global concern, an extraordinary amnesia set in. It didn't get itself stitched into folk memory. I was going to write a novel around it and gathered a lot of books. All the books were about, those 10 days, the political, diplomatic histories and the military stuff, but very little about what it was like for tens of millions of people to contemplate the possibility that it was the end of civilization. And one writer said it was as if we picked up a big stone and looked underneath, and there was something so ghastly that we put the stone back and just walked on. In other words, I think it's going to get very blurred. I agree with you that the chances are slim of reaching the finishing post of the last year of this century without an exchange of nuclear weapons, which is why I postulate India and Pakistan, and then a few years later, Israel in concert with Saudi Arabia attacking Iran to stop it getting a nuclear weapon, only to discover it has some already. We'll probably get through that, a limited nuclear war. Well, several million dead. The coffee shops of Florence will be open. And everyone will be saying, well, we'll get another shot at climate change because global temperatures have dropped 2 degrees. So another catastrophe, a lot of grieving and terrible suffering and a lot of never again. Just like after every American school shooting, never again, and so on.
Do you think part of the challenge here, so the pandemic is an example of this, I think the Cuban Missile Crisis is an example of this too, which is those moments where we realize we're one of 7, 8, 9 billion and we're sharing a common experience. They are also events that separate us from each other because the experience of the universal thing is so local. So the pandemic, it seemed to me, was a good example of this, that we were simultaneously aware we were sharing this experience with pretty much everyone on the planet. And how you experienced it was really different whether you were in Cambridge or London, never mind whether you were in Cambridge or Bangkok or Auckland or Lagos. And actually, the Cuban Missile Crisis, I also was very interested in it for a time, and I around the 50th anniversary, looked into it. I gave a talk to a group of people who had come up to Cambridge as students during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I asked them for their memories of it. And their memories of it were of being in their first few weeks at Cambridge. And what a weird experience it was to simultaneously have the freedom, this is 1962, of going to university at that time when it was a liberating experience, and thinking that the world might end next week. And it was a really weirdly distinctive set of recollections that they had, sitting in the college bar, joking about the end of the world. Sort of unique to that group of people. And the pandemic felt a little like that too. And I feel like it's actually a theme of how you imagine in this book the future, which is that these totalizing events are not totalizing. They are all disaggregating in their way. And after all, the future that you imagine in this book is eventually one of islands, essentially. I mean, there's also, as you describe it, the great inundation. And so we also become separated from each other physically. But it feels to me like it is one of the illusions of waiting for the answer to the question, what is going to be the moment where we suddenly recognize our common humanity? That tends to be the moment where we also simultaneously become aware of all the things that divide us.
Yes, well, I think it's sort of post-religious that there's going to be this moment of clarity. We're going to be asking this question in 100 years' time. It was my sense, your question. I think it's just going to become innate. Now our fates are so caught up with our cleverness in, for example, AI, and it has a sort of runaway quality. We don't know what our own inventions are going to do to us. And That's particularly clear around AI, but the climate crisis is really an old-fashioned crisis. We invented with our cleverness the means of replacing human and animal muscle power with burning fossil fuels and making steam and driving turbines. And now the bill has been presented to us on a plate, 200 years of partying. We did quite well out of it, generally. But that sense of, well, can I use the word revelation, that there's going to be a moment of universal clarity that, it was always going to be an old-fashioned nuclear war between the USA and China. And it's going to rip the whole planet apart. Well, I guess, then we'll all just fade out. But there will still be pockets, Billionaires are building bunkers in the Rockies, and no doubt they could survive down there, maybe a little better than anyone else. Who knows? And the whole thing could start again. I don't know. Science fiction is packed with those kinds of problems. The reason I like to speculate, in other words, to write science fiction without any much science, is that we're not talking enough about the future of the humanities, the future of memory, future of history. What's it like to be in a rundown humanities department 100 years hence, looking back over a pretty bumpy 21st century? And what can we know about each other if the internet survives, in this case in the hands of the local hegemon, which I suggest is Nigeria? Can we somehow form a coherent notion of our times in 100 years' time, when there's this avalanche of trivial information locked in the internet? And so my scholar rather envies those who might be writing about the poetry of George Crabbe and all they've got is the work and some letters, not emails saying I'm on the train or, I'll be 5 minutes late or whatever. One of the reasons I resent the certainty rather, of being dead in the next, 1 to 25 years is I won't get to read the story of this century. I really do want to see if these twin characteristics of humankind are going to land us on which side of the crater. And those twin characteristics are incredible cleverness and incredible stupidity. And as I often say, anyone who's worked in a university knows just how stupid very clever people can be. And we have these twin qualities. Which will prevail, I think, is another version of your question. If you've got the answer to which will prevail, you'll have the answer to your question.
I was once at a party talking to someone who's a senior figure at the Royal Society. And this woman said to me, "This is such a terrible time to be alive." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because we're the ones who won't get to know. The next 50 years are just so interesting, so interesting." And these were two people in their 50s having this conversation. So interesting for thinking about, and there's no comparable period. So it is part of that thought. There's nothing special about us, but there is something a bit special about us, which is we're just on the cusp of that thing where there might be not answers, but evidence of human potential and also potential for catastrophe that hasn't been revealed before. And we may also be unusual for the reason that you suggested just then, and it's a theme of your book, which is that we are uniquely, perhaps, in the whole human story, drowning in trivial evidence about ourselves, so that there may be a future in 50 years' time where we do look unusual relative to everything before and everything after, which is all the information about us is emails, I'm on the train. And maybe this 20-year period is unique in the human story. Maybe one of the reasons, I don't know if this is one of your thoughts behind the way you tell the story of the future, one of the reasons we're unknowable to ourselves is for the same reason we would be unknowable to future historians, which is we are drowning in evidence about ourselves that is more or less meaningless.
Yeah, and you might reach a point where, for some trivia. I resist this idea that there's going to be an answer. As I said earlier, I think it has a sort of vaguely post-religious quality, about a judgment. But the judgment's not coming from God, it's coming from us, as it were. There is going to be no finality. We'll bump and scrape through, we'll regret ourselves.
We won't reveal ourselves to ourselves. There's no revelation.
No, there's no I think the wall on what we can know is right there. But it will be very interesting. I mean, do you remember when the wall fell and people said, well, there won't be anything to write about now? Novelists and spy writers like Le Carré will have no subject. And although I still have a lot of admiration for Fukuyama's end of history, I mean, I think he was right. I mean, I think an open, plural, liberal society is the best so far that we've found. But can we hang on to it is now the question. And again, there's going to be no definitive answer because some places will be hanging on to it and others spiraling away into a strongman notion of autocracy.
Hello, I'm Diane Morgan. If you know who I am, you know who I am. If you don't, who cares? I'm here to explain Italian Time, a holiday phenomenon where Italians throw away their clocks and gather for eternity with San Pellegrino. I've been at this party so long that I've eaten 5 courses, hugged someone's grandma twice and been offered a job in the family restaurant. So this holiday season, make sure to bring enough San Pellegrino to last you through the meal, the after meal and the entire goodbye ritual. San Pellegrino, holiday on Italian Time.
Oh, Hilton stay, your beds are soft and cozy. No lumpy couch, no stiff futon, no shower line at crack of dawn. Oh, Hilton stay.
When you want holiday comfort you can count on, it matters where you stay. Enjoy comfortable rooms and friendly service when you stay with Hilton instead. Save up to 25% this season when you book with Hilton. Hilton for the stay. Terms apply.
He did also say in that book that part of the problem with it as an answer is it is essentially a trivial answer. And actually, what we may end up doing, and he thought the European Union was the exemplar of this, is drowning in a kind of trivial politics because, the opportunities will be limitless for the small stuff and the big stuff, which defined the 20th century, has now gone. And we will get, he says in that book, we will get tired of it. We will get tired of operating at that level, that trivial level.
Well, I can imagine a future historian, David, saying, well, the number of people, the 2 billion living on less than $2 a day shrank to, a fraction of that. The number of girls going to school rose considerably. The number of people with access to clean water. I mean, there are other indices that you can reach for. And yet they were moaning non-stop, intellectuals around the world. In fact, historically, things had never been better, and working class people in France were living a life that Charles V would have envied. Hot showers in winter, glowing liquids they poured all over their head to make their hair fluffy in February, oranges in winter. Amazing life. What were they going on about? I mean, I'm parodying it in a way, but there are indices historically. When people talk about what century would you like to live in, for example, and people say, well, I'd like to live in the early 17th century, whatever, the one thing they forget is, well, then try a life without anesthetics. A visit to the dentist should remind you of your privileges in life, to be born now and not a contemporary of Kit Marlowe or Shakespeare.
Or even 150 years ago, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a great series on Netflix, which is about the assassination of James Garfield, the American president. Have you seen it? So Garfield, it's the story of him and his assassin, a man called Guito, 2 men, as it says at the beginning, forgotten by history. But he's shot in the back, and for 2 months he lingered while they tried to dig out the bullet without anaesthetic. And it was the sepsis that killed him. It turned out that if they'd left the bullet alone, he would have recovered. And he was president of the United States in 1880. So this you don't even have to go back to Charles V. From watching it is incredibly harrowing. And he's also a veteran of the American Civil War. So it's not that long ago that the pain levels that human beings had to endure, regardless of their station in life. You could be president of the United States, and if someone shoots you in the back, the last 2 months of your life are going to be unimaginably horrific. And we're in this, again, it feels like a relatively brief window. That's the thing that it's so hard for us to grasp. We shouldn't think we're special. And yet, as you've just described it, we're the people with the fluffy hair. We're the people who are not suffering pain. And we may be, in that human story, the rare ones.
I mean, I could bring it even closer. My parents' generation, given their class, expected to lose all their teeth in their early 20s.
And sometimes you took them out early just to get it over with, right?
Well, every cartoon that had a married couple in bed would have a glass of water drawn in with some teeth floating around in it. That was just to let you know they were settled people in bed. Someone who didn't die from sepsis, fortunately, was Samuel Pepys, who had a bladder stone removed. He was in a position to get the very best surgeon in town. So a couple of guys, shot of brandy, 2 guys to hold him down. The very best surgeon in town plunged a filthy knife into his perineum, stuck his filthy hand inside, groped for his bladder, cut it open, put his filthy hand inside the bladder, found the stone, came out, sewed up the bladder, withdrew completely, sewed up the perineum, all in 45 seconds. And that was why he was the best in town. Pepys lay for 32 days, suffering terrible sepsis, and survived. Without the best surgeon in town, we would never have those marvelous diaries. So one of the reasons it was a pleasure to find somewhere to stand to describe some sense of who we are, what we're at, is to have someone 100 years hence envying us the vitality of our culture, which of course we might find very annoying. For example, he says about literature, vast armies of novelists and poets, bookshops crammed with these novels, no one knowing what's good. And he said, it's just wonderful. Disagreement, because he lives in a rather moribund society afflicted by all the disasters of the past, and everyone lives rather timidly and agrees with each other. It's a sort of colossal orthodoxy. So gay pride marches, cheese rolling competitions, James Webb Golden Telescope 1,000,000 miles out into outer space. What a vibrant culture where people playing golf on the moon, flying several thousand miles for a long weekend holiday. What a party it was. What a good time they had. Plus, amazing golden age of biography and biochemistry and software writing and more knowledge about the cosmos coming in by the day. We now see stars that were born roughly about the beginning of the time of the universe, 14 billion years back. What amazing universities crammed with students who are unruly but sort of interesting. We could look at ourselves in our corner of northwestern Europe and say it was an amazing time, brilliant, just wonderful.
So that's the thing I find hardest. I'm sorry to harp on this theme because I completely agree with you. One of the mistakes we make is to think we're special. One of the mistakes we make is to think the answer must come to us because this is our life.
Yeah, we're special because we're alive. We're not dead yet.
We're alive. We can't be allowed to die before we're told what is the answer to the mystery or the riddle. There's nothing special about us. We're just in this long sequence of things that get snuffed out. And yet there is something special about us, especially if you think that the next 75 years are going to be harder. Not for everyone, and it's going to be different in different places, but probably for us, among other things, this corner of Northwest Europe, it's probably going to get harder. And so looking back in 100 years' time, it does look like there's something rare and unusual about this period. I think it is part of our dislocated sense of ourselves is that we probably instinctively have a feel for both of these two things at once, that we're nothing special, and this might also be a unique time to be alive. It's really hard to know what to do with that thought.
Well, I was reading Richard Holmes' biography of Tennyson recently, and people were just discovering, first of all, through dinosaur remains and the geology of Charles Lyell and the work of astronomers like Herschel, how old the Earth was, completely challenging deeply held religious beliefs, long before Darwin, several decades before Darwin, a few decades. And it seemed like a crisis point for a sensitive, thoughtful young man like Tennyson. It seemed like an absolute crisis point in civilization. There might be a randomness in the universe, not some direction from God. How will societies hold together? And other people were saying, well, if we let women into universities to study, this could be the end of society as we know it. There are so many questions that afflict previous generations that have no particular interest for us at all. Although, of course, society doesn't fall apart if we have gay marriages, for example, within our lifetime, an extraordinary turnaround. I mean, I've looked at some speeches in Parliament in the 50s, the scourge of homosexuality, like a kind of worm eating away the insides. How daft that now seems. So we have to be careful about our particular concerns. But there is a huge but about this, that when civilizations have collapsed in the past, Easter Island or around the Euphrates, it was local. And now we've devised means of screwing up the whole planet, nuclear war, climate change, and so on. That might be a turning point that it's not of now. We reached it in sort of 1945, really, with nuclear. And the climate crisis is a sort of historic one. It's just very hard to guess. And I want to be very emphatic. My novel is not a prophetic novel. It's speculation, not prophecy. We don't even know what's going to happen next week, whether the war in Ukraine is going to be settled in some hashed up way or not. But my sense is, as I say, that there won't be any revelatory moment, barring an all-out nuclear exchange, and we will scrape through, and even universities will exist in 100, 200 years' time, and will be struggling to understand the past, and also struggling to guess the future.
So that is one of the other things I wanted to ask you about, which is you imagine a future in which the one institution that is completely recognizably the same kind of thing as it is now is the university. And some people might think it's implausible. You've described a 21st century in which the waters have risen, nuclear weapons have been fired, the United States is practically unrecognizable, Nigeria is the dominant power, it's a world turned upside down. And there are universities, same structures, same departments, same squabbles, fights about grants. I no longer work full-time in a university, but I did it for long enough to know that the thing that you are describing is very, very familiar. And it might seem implausible, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. So on this podcast, we talk about lots of different historical periods and events. We did a series on the Reformation. We've done series on revolutions, on medieval philosophy. And through all of this, one of the constants is the university. And weirdly, throughout all of it, it's structured more or less the same. So this afternoon, I'm going to a seminar in Cambridge about a text that was written at the end of the 16th century about how universities should be run and what they're for and what their advantages are, in which the language is similar to the language you use to describe universities in the 22nd century. It's about what should the bursar do? How much power should be given to the senior lecturers? Should the students be allowed more license or less license? Who should set the curriculum?
Yeah, who's in charge of the wine cellar, I think was this in Cambridge.
Who's in charge of the wine cellar? And apart from the Catholic Church, maybe, and even relative to the Catholic Church, there is no other institution. There is no other institution that has that millennial continuity. And I just don't know why. Do you know why? What is it about universities?
It's very amusing. As you describe it, I can't help smiling at the sort of absurdity of it.
It is absurd. It is completely absurd. And yet these institutions survive. So in your telling, they survived nuclear war. You know, if you lived through the Reformation in Oxford or Cambridge, that was like nuclear war. People were being burned at the stake because of what they said in a lecture. And yet the institutions survived that. You'd think that would be the end of this institution. We're not going to carry on like this if we burn each other.
Well, thank you, David. But you make my point that we scraped through the 30-year war. If you'd lived through that, you'd think this was the end of the world. I mean, it's the violence. Or the American Civil War, maybe the first really modern, horrific war. Second World War, 90 million dead. Not only do I have a university, but I also have very reluctant students at it, not really listening, not interested in raking over the past. Think of my generation at university in the mid to late 60s. At our backs were 90 million dead. Most of our teachers had fought in the war, certainly at school. But, we had paperback books, rock and roll, marijuana, and our thoughts were not much of the past, not even of the future. So if universities go on, and I think they probably will hang on, partly because human curiosity is another sort of feature of what we are, and they have deep roots. And also technological civilizations need that expertise. So there are, separately from medieval Heidelberg or wherever. Cambridge is now a forest of, as you come in on the train, of science parks. And that's where, interestingly, you'll find great concentrations of cleverness and stupidity, braided together, often in one person. Maybe I should predict that the one thing that's going to survive in literature will be the campus novel of 500 years' time.
The world you describe is also one in which the humanities are being squeezed. To justify why should you pay people to disinter the state of mind of an author 100 years ago?
Well, plus ça change.
Plus ça change. Yeah, I find myself thinking now, if I was to go back to university. So we do a series for this podcast about significant trials, and we're about to do the Lady Chatterley trial. And I thought, well, I've never read Lady Chatterley's Lover, so I should read it. Very, very interesting book, it turns out. Surprisingly, not the sex, but the class stuff, war, all the rest of it. And I think if I was to go back to university now, I would want to do, I think, is it still called English literature? I don't even know if it's called that.
Yeah, it's called business studies.
The students call it film studies because no one reads the books anymore. But still, it feels like one of the perennial things, whatever happens in the future, one of the questions insofar as there will be universities or people who think that what they want to do with their lives is to be paid to study something, to try to re-enter the mind of the people who wrote the books. It feels like that is one of the constants that does run through that university story. And there is no reason to think that a limited nuclear exchange would kill that. It would reinforce it.
No, because it's much cheaper to write a novel than to make a movie. So I think the novel as an instrument of investigation of what we are will just hang on in there. It might be a niche matter, as it is now, the literary novel at least. But it's had such eloquent opposition for the last 100 years, film and long-form television series that have been likened to Victorian novels and so on. But still it goes on. People go on reading them and writing them. And we haven't yet bettered a means of looking at individuals, the flow of thought, consciousness, thought and feeling, and relation of individuals to their families and societies and so on. We don't have a better instrument yet to do that. So closely allied to that would be biography. You said looking into the minds of the people who created those things. Do we know each other better than we know the mind of Anna Karenina? I'd say it's quite close. Certain characters could fill your mind. I often feel that I know more about Stephen Dedalus and Joyce's account of him than I know of most of my friends. So how odd to be living in the company of ghosts. We get our sense of other minds from immersion in complete fictions. So if you had a world in which industrial civilization had collapsed and your technology was largely reduced to how best to raise from the seabed all the vehicles and lorries of 100 years before, strip them of metal and melt down the metals, you need technologies and energy to do that. You might have university departments who do nothing else but study that on the science side. But like medieval monks, I think the humanities department will keep alive the old spark of civilization and want to speculate about us, the ghosts, the past.
And do you think that your 100-year from now biographer will not be able to see you because of the blizzard of emails? I mean, do you think you are hidden yourself by, particularly in the last, I guess, 20 years, just this forest of stuff that would surround you in the way that in your novel, I mean, we haven't discussed it, but it's about the mystery of a poem and a poet. But it's almost impossible to get to the truth of it because there is just this stuff that has to be waded through, which leaves a false impression. You say you don't know your friends. Do any of us know any of each other anymore? Because we are mediating our relationships through a forest of electronic communication.
Yeah, and when the post took 3 weeks, let's say in Napoleon's time, just getting from one end of France to the other, or into Austria, to Austerlitz, there's much more. He's not simply saying, I'm on the train. And he's not only writing about military matters. Similarly, the letters, of Darwin and many, many Victorian writers, because they're in a much slower, steadier sense of a dialogue with a distant person. There's more information. There's a sense of a subjective reflection of the day, the afternoon on which that 3,000-word letter was written. No one writes 3,000-word texts or emails now. We don't even have 3,000-word phone calls so much. We now dread someone phoning up and saying, I'm just phoning for a chat. And you think, wait a minute, I was in the middle of writing an email there and now I have to stop. So yes, on the other hand, if Shakespeare had left behind journals or texts or emails, we would have had a much more interesting sense of his daily life, which we crave. Mostly what we know of Shakespeare's life is wherever he tangled with the state, bureaucracy, the courts.
So we're knowable in a more quotidian way, but, our interior lives are so exterior now that the interior bit is likely to be more mysterious someone looking back in 100 years to us.
Yeah, I think we do need to revive the art of journal keeping, encourage it in everyone. I kept a journal from about 1974 to about 2000 or somewhere around there. Then I just gave up. This idea that I could somehow make life more interesting and richer, or my past, my senses, most of life that we lead is entirely forgotten.
Do you reread your journal?
No, it just bores me to read it. I have no interest in it. I'm glad it's there. I might throw it all on the fire at the end of life. I don't know.
My mother, who moved to Britain from South Africa when she was just turned 20, and she wrote a letter home every week, and she kept a carbon copy, and she's about to turn 90. And what she likes to do is to reread those letters over and over again. And occasionally I read some of them. And they are a window into a world. The weekly letter home across the ocean, on those little blue airmail things that no one under the age of 30 would know what we were talking about. And it is the record of her life. I mean, it is the thing that connects her to her past. Without those letters, she would have no connection.
I wrote to my parents from boarding school, twice a week. It was compulsory. But my mother always wrote back. And, she left school at 14. She was not a literate person. But she had a great habit of tidiness. So when she'd answered my letter, she would tear it up because that was now dealt with. I would love to have those letters. But I know it would say, we beat Norwich 15-11 at rugby and we had egg and chips for tea. It was probably not much more than that.
But your future biographer would also love to have those letters.
Yeah, I suppose so. But maybe what we do leave behind will be, walk into, heifers or waterstones, black whales, and look at the number of memoirs that are published, sometimes to huge commercial success, novels, obviously, but go to the history of the present, as it were, the state of things, where we are, where we're heading type books, thousands of them. So I think there'll be plenty of evidence of what we thought and all conversations like this and how wrong we were and so on. Very few people are going to be right about the future. And again, maybe we just underestimate ourselves. We do a lot of Sunday papers are full of 1,500 words on the state of the world. Plenty of subjective life there. So I think our traces will be quite extensive.
And Substack, which didn't exist a few years ago and is already changing because it's moving from a written to a visual medium, as all of these things do faster and faster. Podcasting is now a visual medium. It's ceased to be an audio medium because everything needs to be on YouTube. But Substack, even during its sort of golden years, which were probably 2023 to 2020, early 2025, my God, there's an amazing amount of fascinating stuff on there.
Plus, on top of that, the transformation of photography. Ordinary people's photography, not art photography. I don't think I have a single photograph of me somewhere between the ages of 13 and 20. So I was no longer interesting as a child. So that was over. I was a sort of spotty teenager. And anyway, at boarding school, who took photographs? Why would you? You're not on holiday, for example.
And also such a faff to get them developed.
Oh, development. Would they come out? As it Yeah. Now, most of us take endless pictures. Usually, when I look back at all the photographs taken since, I had a digital camera from 2004, and up until that point when phones became cameras, for me, that was about 2016 or so. I can't remember now. I seem to be always on holiday, and I'm always on a mountain or by a lake, or I seem to live in paradise. If I look at this, and I always have a backpack, and I'm always wearing boots, or I've just come out of a river. And I think, what a life, what a wonderful life. Daily life is actually not there in the photography. It's all those special moments of fun, basically. And it's worth reminding how much fun life is if you're privileged to be, in this corner of the world and not out of work or homeless or whatever.
And your future biographer will look at those photos and say, well, when did he write the books? But this is the illusion we have. It's a bit like thinking there will be the one disaster. There won't be the one record of us. There will be the photos and the books. There will be the written Substacks and the TikToks. The future's unknowable, but what we know is it'll be multiple. I mean, that's actually what I take to be the theme of your book. It will not be moving towards a single point. All of those events that look like single points will actually break us apart in various ways and leave multiple traces. We will leave multiple traces.
We'll stumble through. But just coming back to photography for a moment, the ways in which we just go about our daily life, knowing full well we're not here forever, but able to ignore the fact mostly, is caught in photography when you look at people who are dead now. But at that moment that they were staring into the lens and smiling, either with a backpack or they were in their swimming trunks, and they died 10 years ago. And we know when they died. We know something that the person in the photograph doesn't know. There is what Susan Sontag calls, in her lovely little book on photography, it's called, the term she used was the posthumous irony of photography, catching that moment. And I often think of that when there's a face of some young person who's been murdered in a knife attack in one of our cities, and that young person is smiling. I mean, it's the photograph that's been provided by the relatives to the press, and it's usually a happy moment. And we now know something terrible has happened that smile knows nothing of. And I find that very haunting, that we too will be smiling into the camera, and someone else will be looking at our faces and thinking, yes, well, on the 10th of May, he copped it. And that's the sense I was trying to get in this novel of what it would be like if you could hold in your head the past, the present, and the future. So someone looks at us from 100 years ahead, then we have more or less the same events told by someone who's in the present. And you could run all three together, not in a mystical sense that Eliot stretched for in the Four Quartets, but in the practical sense of the way those three elements of past, present, and future interpenetrate. And if we could get it into our minds somehow, where we could hover above all three, sort of out of time, looking down. And maybe it's just only the novel can give you those privileged positions.
And since this podcast is called Past, Present, Future, let's end it there.
Oh, is it?
It is.
Well, there you go.
Let's end it there. Only the novel and the occasional podcast can give you those three at once. Ian McEwan's What We Can Know is available wherever you get your books, ideally in a real bookshop. Just a reminder that if you are thinking about Christmas presents, you can get the person in your life a gift subscription of either 6 or 12 months to PPF Plus. They will get our bonus episodes, ad-free listening, and automatic sign-up to our newsletter. Just go to our website, ppfideas.com, or click on the link in the show description. The gift can be delivered to the recipient of your choice on Christmas Day. Also, if you would like PPF tote bags, our gorgeous bone china mugs, the link will be in the show description too. Next time, it's back to our series about politics on trial. And we have got 3 more trials for you this year, 3 of the epic trials of the 20th century. Coming up, Mandela, Eichmann. But before that, a trial that's not remembered as political, but had huge social, cultural and political significance. The trial in 1960 of Penguin Books under the Obscene Publications Act, because Penguin wanted to publish D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, and a jury had to decide whether that would or would not corrupt the nation. That's next time. This has been Past, Present, Future.